do 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 do. Hello, this is Benjamin Boyce, and I'm live streaming for no particular reason on a Thursday evening, a little bit later than I wanted to, but I got distracted. And now I'm looking at this application that I use to stream with, and it's showing my audio is not as hot as I want it. So I'm going to turn it up, but I want to blow out. I don't want to blow out. I'm also looking really choppy, though. Anyhow, this is Benjamin Boyce, and I will start to wrap upon a topic of the commenters choosing as soon as they choose something for me to wrap upon. But I really have nothing going on other than one beer more than I would have liked to have in me before I began a live stream. I like to start at 0, and I've already had one, so I'm going to be a little sloppy. I also have a new setup. I can't really show you guys it, but I got this bar that hopefully, I think I found the studs, but I'm not really good at stud finding. There's this bar that goes across the studio, and then I have my audio arm with the mic on it dangling down, and I have the camera on an arm dangling down, and I got a newer light that's just positioned on it, and I have another light, and those are both the same kind of lights. So it's pretty bright in here for me, but I like the way that it is showing up, at least so far as this program is showing what I'm showing you to me. But then when I go over to YouTube after the live streams are done, it looks a little grayed out, apparently. So that's just technical issues. So we can just chalk this up to me doing technical setup things. I will try to futz with the lighting really quick and then look at the chat, and let's just see if I can just dim it now. Whoa, ouch. Okay, no, that was the wrong button. So let's dim it. Ooh, ow. Ugh. Can we do it? It's a little more warm than I want it to be. There we go. I think that's fine. Whatever. Doesn't matter. That's enough of that. This is Benjamin Boyce. Do I rap? Asks Howard Schoonover. And no. But Eminem was a good inspiration for me insofar as everything that I wanted to write as a writer would be constantly met by people saying, just say what you mean. And I'm like, well, I want to, I don't, it's not just about saying something, it's about saying something cool with language. And Eminem, the preeminent rap artist, showed me that you could just play around with language. But the stuff that I did that is closest to rap is more along the lines of a very dorky classical tradition of rhyming schemes, and there's more cross rhyming that I could do. I did do an interview that didn't turn out well with a rap artist that you can find within my community tab. And he does these anti-woke raps that are absolutely brilliant, and I'm terrible with names. So let me go over to my community tab and find his name. Francis, what's his name? Francis Aaron. He's got a YouTube channel, and his stuff is absolutely brilliant. We recorded a conversation, but the audio was terrible, and I didn't want to publish it. So I was giving him more leeway to do more work in the way that he wants to do work, which is to actually publish all these songs that he has. But his producer is a perfectionist, and so I couldn't get any new material from them because he's done like a whole rap album on Nietzsche and Dostoevsky. And I just thought it was absolutely brilliant. So I'm going to have him back on again, or I'm going to try to record him again. I didn't publish our first interview. So, no, I don't rap. And insofar as rap has a specific meaning, I do play around with language And I do have an Evergreen musical. I've sung parts of it to the audience here and there. I have a really bad recording or two that I've made in the bathroom because I sing these songs in the shower, and I need like 3 or 4 more songs to make the album complete. I do have another Evergreen episode that I've been working on. I found the welcome party for the new executive vice president, and I was watching it the other day, and he starts to lean into the metaphor of him being in church, and then a speaker comes on after him, and it just becomes this church service in the African American gospel tradition, plus a bunch of very particular African American ideological black nationalistic rhetoric about co opting ancient Egypt to solidify their claim to owning the entire academy. And then they start praising the divine feminine and going into this incredibly intense church service. And I was watching it and I was just screaming at the screen, what the ever loving, I'm like, what is going on here? And I'm like, okay, well, Evergreen gave me more material, but I went through and I started to transcribe what he was talking about in he gave some sort of notes on his radical communitarian philosophy. This guy's name is Dexter Gordon. And I was noticing this pattern within his language where he wasn't defining any of his terms, but his terms were very easily assumed to be about communism and critical race theory, or at least critical theory, but everything was just angled just so that you couldn't really pin it down to what he was talking about. So we went through and I did all the notes on that. And then I went through and I investigated him, and I found one lecture that he gave where he explicitly endorses critical race theory. So he believes wholeheartedly in critical race theory, and he was the director of the Race and Pedagogy Institute at University of Puget Sound. And I went through there and I cataloged one issue of their journal that they published, which was a bunch of master's degree in education students doing all these art projects on race, which were all based on critical theory. And so I got all that data, and then I found a book that he wrote. Pardon me, 1 second. Then I got the book that he wrote, and it was on Google Books, so I could only read every 5th page. And so I bought the book, and I've been reading that book, which is really fascinating because it's about critical rhetoric studies, which is a rhetoric version of critical theory. And it's really fascinating to me because I'm basically at heart a rhetorician or rhetor. That's basically like if you would break down what I do and what I studied at Evergreen and what I'm really interested in on an intellectual level, it's not necessarily narrative, it's rhetoric. It's how to produce narratives and how to frame ideologies and break them down and build them back up and investigate them. Because basically I'm a critical theorist. Basically I'm a postmodernist. I've been saying this constantly. And James Lindsay is gradually becoming closer and closer and closer to my premise that we're in a postmodern era. It's just the leftists or the leftishists screwed it up. So it's really a fascinating book by Dexter Gordon, who's the new executive vice president of the Evergreen State College, because Evergreen State College couldn't find a replacement for George Bridges, because either the state of the college was so disastrous that nobody wanted to touch it, or the actual faculty were so disastrous that nobody wanted to work with them. So they couldn't find a new president. So they promoted a vice president of finance and operations, John Carmichael, who actually in every video that I see of him, every instance of communication that I've seen of him recorded or written gives me the sense that this guy is a level-headed man, John Carmichael, who's the interim president. But they also created a executive vice president position specifically to aid John Carmichael, and then they collapsed a bunch of their social justice divisions within the administration under this executive vice president role, and then they gave it to Dexter Gordon, who is an avowed critical race theorist or critical rhetorical theorist, which basically is critical theory, but his critical theory is completely based on race with gender and other things thrown in. And I found Dexter Gordon's major monograph called Black Identity, which is about the development of Black nationalism following the Civil War in America. Though he's Jamaican, he moved to America at some point. He's got a very thick accent. It's completely understandable because I believe Jamaicans that I've spoken to are actually, I think their main language is English. It just has a very heavily accented tenor to it. And he wrote that monograph on Black identity about rhetoric and about the creation of the Black identity within America following the Civil War. And I've just been reading it. It's like 300 pages, but it's academic prose. It's really intensely packed together. And it's really frustrating because, again, within that document, he doesn't define his terms until later on in the document. So I'm jumping back and forth, trying to figure out what he's talking about, which is a perfectly postmodern critical theorist thing, to hide all the things and all the things. Like, what do you actually mean by radical communitarianism? And so I have this material to create this episode, but because he's engaged me intellectually, it's taking longer than me just popping off about George Bridges, who is transparently a doofus, transparently just incompetent. This guy's very competent, but his ideology is very, very slippery. So I'm assembling this episode, which is going to start out with that weird church service because most people just want to hear the craziness that's Evergreen, and then really showing all the language games that are at play here and trying to argue or to honestly engage with this theory that he's created about Black identity and about what he thinks the academy should do, which is to basically admit that all of the academy is ideologically based, and the best ideology is a Marxist ideology. But Marxism doesn't go far enough, he says in his book, Marxism doesn't go far enough because it only thinks about class and it doesn't think about race. So he reformulates Marxism as a theory of alienation and anti-alienation or unalienation that's resolved within communism, and he bases that on race, but there's this hard thing. I'm trying to figure out what he wants. Does he want integration or segregation with regards to the Black identity? And so I'm wrestling with this text, and is there this dialectical resolution in communism with regards to race? But it doesn't seem that he wants that because he draws so much power and importance in the idea of blackness within America and white supremacy within America, that to say that we can go beyond race would undercut his entire project of critical theory, which is basically dividing the entire world into the haves and the have-nots, or the oppressors and the oppressed, and that every language game, every commercial interaction is about exploiting the oppressed to the benefit of the oppressors. And if you base that entire framework, that Marxist conflict theory framework, upon race, then the resolution can't be the end of race, because then you don't have anything else to stand on. Then you would have to revert back into a colorblind mode of being, which he doesn't want. So it's really interesting, and it's all hidden. It's not straightforward. It's all hidden. And there's good parts of him. He does great work in his community. And there's really material and real issues that he's trying to address. But he's using this critical theory, high academic language or ideology which claims all this knowing and then undercuts the aspect of knowing, because he constantly says, I have to go through his entire speech and like untangle how he's talking about there are other ways of knowing. He's just talking about how we need to destroy the academy in order to bring in what's outside of the academy, because what's outside of the academy has other ways of knowing. What do you mean by other ways of knowing? And then he references this thing called affect theory or critical affect theory, which is basically a theory of emotions, which is again Marxist, in that emotions are created socially in order to hedge up a hegemony of status quo. So the whole thing is just this infinite series of like reactionary and counter-reactionary gambits, and he's using rhetoric. It's just fascinating stuff. So I've bitten off more than I can chew, and I went off on that. So I'm processing that. There's a lot to process there. Hope you guys are doing good. Yeah, and throughout his whole book, he's constantly evoking critical theory, right? And the Frankfurt School, right? And the product of his institute, Dexter Gordon, who's the executive vice president of the Evergreen State College now, who was the director of the Race and Pedagogy Institute in the University of Puget Sound, or at the University of Puget Sound, what they create are these programs specifically targeted to teaching K through 12 teachers critical race theory that they then implement in the education environment between K and 12, which completely undercuts the entire rhetorical trick that's going on right now with the left, that critical theory is not in schools. Like, this guy's literally, his whole job, his whole endeavor is to implement critical race theory in all levels of education. He's just totally open about it. But he was open about it before it became known. I have lectures from 2011, and I have the lecture from a few weeks ago where he doesn't actually explicitly state anything. It's all coded. So you have to go back to what he was talking about before. You couldn't talk about that anymore. And then I went through the Race and Pedagogy Institute's journal on race and pedagogy, and I found this journal issue that was dedicated to him, that was a bunch of master degree students that are now working in public education. And they had all these art projects where they're implementing critical race theory, either explicitly or not explicitly, but it's all critical race theory, and trying to say, how do I bring this into the classroom? How do I talk about race in math? How do I talk about race to first graders? How do I make everything about race? All of their projects are about, how do I talk about race in books, in stories, and this and that, and all this. How do I teach children to think about race all the time? It's all explicit. And the thing is, I went through and I found all these students in this master's degree program at the Race and Pedagogy Institute that I found this journal on. I found them all on Twitter, and they're all very, very pretty white girls. One Asian and one not so pretty white girl. But they're all like white women that are trying to implement critical race theory. The BS of Dexter Gordon, which is the only thing that Evergreen does anymore. Evergreen is tanking. I have another thing. This is all for this episode, so I'm just trying to process this out loud. But Evergreen, the institution is failing so hard. And so the Board of Trustees and the administration are trying to figure out a way. According to one professor, I have this email chain. According to one professor of the Evergreen State College, the Board of Trustees and the administration of the Evergreen State College are trying to figure out a way to declare financial exigency, which means insolvency of this institution, in order for them to completely renege on all of their 10-year contracts. They're trying to figure out a way to cut out all of these contracts without declaring financial exigency, which would be an embarrassment, which would say that if they declared financial exigency, then they're responsible for what happened to that institution. And so they're trying to rewrite the rules around what is financial exigency, or if they have to declare that in order to start firing people according to these new rules. Because if they can just fire people, then they're still solvent. But in the contract, they can't fire people with tenure until they declare financial exigency, which means that they were responsible for what happened. And they're trying to get away from it. And while they're trying to figure out a way to safely fire all these state employees by rewriting the rules, which is what they do. They just rewrite the rules when things don't work for them. While they're doing that, they're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to all these administrators, right? So they hired Carmichael, the new president. They gave him $300,000 a year, and then they hired this Dexter Gordon guy at $250,000 a year to turn this institution, the state institution, more explicitly into an ideological echo chamber that indoctrinates public servants, public residents, right? So the four things that Evergreen produces is undergraduate degrees, which are mostly handed out to people who are in state tuition because it's really cheap. Even before all this fiasco, it's very cheap. It's like $7,300 a year for in-state tuition, $30,000 or $29,000 outstate institution. So it produces undergraduates. And so we'll produce ideological undergraduates. It also has a master's in teaching, MIT it's called, master's in teaching. So it produces ideologically motivated teachers. And I have documents that I can't publish from anonymous sources, anonymous people who are trying to take the public administration master's and the teaching master's degree, where they actually literally have to jump through ideological hoops in order to get their degree. People have told me that they can't complete their degree until they agree with the ideology that's promulgated at Evergreen, which is already heavily progressive, heavily based on critical theory, and now explicitly overseen by this guy who's explicitly a critical race theorist or a critical rhetorical theorist who bases his critical theory upon race, which is a rejiggered Marxism. I feel like this is the spoiler live stream. It's too late to rename it. So anyways, that's what's going on. Hey, Colin. How's it going, buddy? I hope you guys can hear me. I hope I wasn't blowing out. Am I too loud? I feel like I'm too loud. Let's turn it down a little bit. Anyhow, I wonder what Colin Wright is drinking. Colin Wright, if you wanna join me, you can. I have a beer. I was already one beer in before I started this, and then once I start talking, I can't drink because like your job when you start a stream is to not stop talking. It's the entire job of it. But I was a little more passionate than I meant to. Regardless to say, I'm trying to engage with Dexter Gordon, who's the executive vice president of the Evergreen State College, and his ideas in good faith to try to understand them. So now I'm reading through his book in order to make an argument that's salient to my crowd, but also perhaps, not that it matters, to the residents of Washington State who are paying for this entire thing because students aren't paying anymore because students aren't showing up. Super chat from Common Cure. Did Rufo, let's try to make that smaller. Did Rufo do the right thing by mainstreaming CRT as a catch-all for what's going in schools? My fear is that now we're jumping down every teacher's throat instead of taking a more surgical approach. So this, what you're pointing out, is the pendulum that people were warning about, that my guests have been warning about for a long time. People were saying, if we don't stop this now, the pendulum swing is going to do more damage than we want, right? The motion to correct is going to do damage if we don't correct correctly. But things have gone too far in one direction. So Rufo figured out it's time to do overcorrection time. Or he figured out a way, rhetorically speaking, to encapsulate the argument around a rhetorical trick of making CRT the catch-all term, just like woke is the catch-all term for what we are fighting against. And if Colin Wright wants to connect with me on Skype, he can join this stream. It's up to you, dude. He wants me to drink more. Only time will tell if Chris Rufo did the right thing. Chris Rufo doesn't care about right or wrong. He's playing a game. And the game is total war. Whether you agree or not with total war, he is now engaged with total war. But you see the people on the other side of things, and they are already engaged in total war. If you look, and this is a very poor representation of public discourse, but it's what I got. If you look at Twitter, which is a very poor representation of public discourse, but that's all we have right now. If you look at Twitter, the interpretations of the Kyle Rittenhouse trial will show you incredibly entrenched ideological camps. Now, I am biased with regards to Kyle Rittenhouse. I did a lot of investigation when that happened. I looked at a lot of the footage. I didn't comment on it. I didn't make any videos of it because it's out of my purview. And I try to have some sort of epistemic humility and only talk about things that I know deeply or that I feel deeply. And Kyle Rittenhouse's the entire event around Kyle Rittenhouse was too fraught with a lot of different legal issues. So I'm not the person to speak to that stuff. All these open carry permits and all these different legal issues that are going on. But it was very obvious to me, biased though I am, against the violence that was happening night after night in cities to the north of me and to the south of me and to the east of me. There's nothing west of me. So I don't think Hawaii was burning. And I don't think Alaska was burning, if we're just going to talk about the United States of America. But these acts of violence were happening over and over and over and over and over again. And they were literally called not violence. They were literally redefined as mostly peaceful. Right? And then you have one person who was trying ostensibly against those things, trying to protect things, a kid, and then the thing, and then the violence, and then the death, and then the firearms, and then all this other stuff happened. But it was really obvious to me from all the footage that I saw that the kid was in a really bad situation, and he followed a certain code of behavior that I've learned when I learned how to handle guns and how the responsibility that you have when you do carry a firearm. And then all the other things that are going. Anyways, it's a complex case, and I am sure that there are ways of looking at it that I don't see or that I don't agree with that still carry certain legal weight with regards to what happened with Kyle Rittenhouse and the 3 people that he shot. There's more than one interpretation. There is more than one interpretation of those events. And then there's more than one, I'm sure, legal ramification of what happens when we prosecute those events. There's nuance to be had here. There's a conversation to be had here. But if you look on Twitter and the way that I don't even know what to call them anymore. You can't call them woke because blah, 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 blah. You can't call them left because blah, 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 blah. And progressive, blah, 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 blah. And liberal, blah, 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 blah. Like, what do you even call those people? But the entire framework of the conversation, who more or less carry the Democrat banner, or Democratic banner, are calling Kyle a white supremacist. Like, what? And the way that they're framing the conversation is total rhetorical war. The other side, or the side with a tremendous amount of power, is playing a total war game. They are taking no prisoners. They will argue against the prison industrial complex, but want this kid locked up and gang raped in a prison. You can go through Twitter accounts with verified checks that will be against prisons and against jokes around sexual assault that will want this kid locked up forever and raped in prison. Right? They are playing a total war game. Now, to what extent Chris Rufo, with playing total war, with regards to CRT, with regards to framing the issues around school boards in such extreme or less than perfectly nuanced terms, let's say, and I think more people than less people might agree with me and not be offended by me opining that Chris Rufo is not playing a nuanced game. He is foregoing nuance in order to get a specific outcome. That has already happened on the so-called other side. How do you combat that? Right? I've spoken to James Lindsay about this. I've spoken to Peter Boghossian about this. Peter Boghossian thinks that we need to nuke the academy. We need to completely tear it down. It's total war. He has very good reason to think that. James Lindsay is like, let's cancel the cancelers until we have symmetry of cancellation. James Lindsay long ago has given up on fighting against cancel culture and says, it's here, let's go with it. And let's look for symmetry of the playing field. That is a viable game or viable strategy in the game that is being played with the opponents that they are playing against. So I think that in this brief screed about that one question, about how is it proper to frame things with regards to CRT that Rufo's doing, I think there are nicer ways to play, and those ways haven't panned out. Chris Rufo is getting results. The results of the other side are terrifying. And they're playing a no nuance game too. So to what degree will the pendulum swing do more damage than good is the question that we need to constantly be asking ourselves. So it's absolutely important. It's absolutely important for people to say, is that too far? Even if it supports your priors, or if it goes in the direction that you want, even if that direction is correction, you need to ask, is that too far? Could we be doing better? And the moment that people say, don't ask those questions, you're slowing down this war. The moment people say, you need to back off criticism because they're on your side, is the moment that you know things will start going too far. The moment that you can't ask for nuance and demand refinement of argument is the moment that you know that people will not do the minimum necessary amount of force to correct things. And the minimum amount of force is the goal. That is the goal. Always is the goal in this game for me. And if you give up that ground, then total war becomes less than a metaphor. Total war spills out of these stupid little echo chambers built out of words and sentences that we can afford to exist in our little pods, waiting for our shots, eating our little bugs. That's my argument, and I might be wrong. So I'm going to go back up through the super chats. Thank you for joining me and allowing me to riff nonchalantly into my camera. I hope I look okay. Really worried about my lighting. I'm trying to be really looking good. Trying to look really good. Super chat $4.99 from Aaron Smithy. It's amazing how people will let their need to be right and feel morally superior override their own safety. Oh man, some guy was saying that some guy on Twitter was saying we need to make a law where you're not allowed to carry a firearm when you go into a place with guaranteed danger. I'm misquoting him, but he was saying we need to make a law making it illegal to carry a firearm when going to a place with guaranteed danger, which completely undercuts the entire mostly peaceful thing. Like, okay, there's guaranteed danger, but it's certified mostly peaceful. It's just the narrative spin that's going around with the Rittenhouse trial. It's like, and again, it's relegated to Twitter on one level, but that's only because the intelligentsia are writing these really extreme denunciations of this minor. I guess he's 18 now, but they're setting up the groundwork to call their enemies white supremacists and that they need to be treated with the maximum amount of force in order to correct them. Now that trickles down once it gets to summer and these stupid freaking kids with nothing better to do go out onto the streets of Portland or wherever city they go out on. They use that to justify their behavior. So it does trickle down. It does spill out of Twitter. If 2020 showed us anything, it's that people will not be locked down and look at social media and call bullshit. They will more or less, well, a certain percentage of them having nothing better to do will take those Twitter arguments and make them manifest in the real world and destroy. And so that's the thing. I mean, and that's my bias with regards to the Kyle Rittenhouse thing. Kyle Rittenhouse was standing against this wanton destruction of property in the name of this justice cause. And then he was beset upon by demonstrably bad actors, pedophiles, criminals, stupid people, right? And there's more nuance in that. It's hard for me not to escape my bias with regards to the video footage of what happened and also the context in which it happened and the narrative around that. So I try to publish or make public that I am biased with regards to why I think the way I do about what happened on that night. But the thing is that I look at the responses to that on Twitter and it's like, these people are unhinged. They don't want to be hinged. How do you correct that? You don't correct it by being unhinged. I just don't know, man. My ultimate hope and prayer is that it's so unstable that it exhausts itself and they fight amongst themselves and tear each other apart before they embroil all of us into all-out war. Anyways, I think I'm repeating myself and not being salient anymore. So let's go on to the next super chat. $19 from Christopher Vance. Thank you so much. Thank you for being the voice of reason. I actually need to go back to the voice of reason, the conversation things. Either that or hire a trademark lawyer. I need to hire a trademark lawyer to see if the company that's based in Canada that trademarked conversation could possibly strip me of my freedom of speech because I call myself conversations, plural. Colin really wants me to drink, so I'm going to drink. I'm going to try to give this the vocal sensuality that it deserves, but I think that I've already ruined a certain percentage. Oh, whoa, I can move that. How can swallows and sparrows understand the flight of the crane and the wild goose? That really reminds me of a William Blake quote, but I know it's not a William Blake quote. I'm still, like, my entire setup, it's really rickety right now. I hope they're in the studs. Speaking of studs, I guess Colin Wright's fine with sipping his moonshine, not joining me in live broadcast. Anyways, I only have a half hour more of this before I should go eat. Super chat from Tommy Riley. Thank you so much. Lacanian libidinal economy is the best way to understand Rittenhouse case and CRT. But if you want to decapitate the radicals, call out Afro-pessimism as it undermines American pluralism. See, that's the thing with Dexter Gordon, who's the executive vice president of the Evergreen State College, who's a critical rhetorical theorist. I'm trying to figure out if he wants segregation or integration, and he won't come down on that. So maybe I can search for Afro-pessimism and the tensions between that and American pluralism, because the claim that the African-American descendants of slaves have against America, which is a very solid claim, is the justification within the American systems for their slavery and for their very slow appropriation, or for America very slowly giving them their rights and their rhetorical identity as political beings. So Afro-pessimism, if it's justified, certainly I think that it is justified with regards to America, but American pluralism and a pluralism of ethnicities and ideologies under the banner of a United States is the real question. How to get there is the real question. I have evidence that he doesn't want to burn the entire system down. He says this in the speech that I found, Dexter Gordon, who I'm talking about. Go back to the earlier part of the conversation. He brings up this conversation between Martin Luther King Jr. and another person, where somebody says, shouldn't we just burn the Martin Luther King Jr.? There's this metaphor about the burning house and whether we should just let the entire house burn down or not, because is the entire American project so irredeemably smitten by its sins that we should just let it burn? And Martin Luther King Jr. says something to the effect, if I recall correctly, and this will be in my video, that we need firefighters. We need to be firefighters. We need to fight this fire. And Dexter Gordon says that we need to fight the fire. Now, whether or not critical race theory is another fire or not, or critical rhetorical theory based in race is another fire or not, is yet to be determined. But it seems like he's a good guy, and he wants good. And he's not a completely deconstructionist for deconstructionist's sake, but he does base a lot of things in the oppositional narrative. And so perhaps Afro-pessimism is one way of understanding that, if I can look into that more. But Lacanian libidinal economy, I'll have to look that up too. That sounds like a really juicy conversation. Happy Veterans Day, everybody. My grandpa was in World War II. He was stationed in the South Pacific on a boat that was looking for mines. My grandfather was on the American side. And then he ended up being stationed in California, even though he was from Oklahoma. And in California is where he met my grandmother. And then he never went back to Oklahoma. He raised a family, and then she succumbed to cancer in her mid-30s. They had 4 children, and then he was remarried. But her absence has been a defining characteristic of my family upbringing. And I hope someday to meet her in the spiritual plane, though she has spoken to me before. She has helped me. She's sent me little gifts from the beyond. Super chat, $10. It disappears. I hope my lighting's good. It looks like I look what I want to look like. I hope I sound like I want to sound like. Super chat, $10 from Common Cure. What I mean, instead of screaming at a board, are you teaching CRT? We could be targeting what classes are doing racial affinity groups, privilege walks. Are their teachers similar to Gabrielle Gipe? Yeah, well, I mean, that's ultimately the thing. So there's a number of different ways that we need to counter that. On the ground, parents need to be investigating instances of queer theory and critical race theory within classrooms and asking for their removal or demanding their removal in no uncertain terms, or making arguments against specific instances of these ideologies propping up in classrooms. But you also have to understand that the teachers that end up being educated within education institutions and then seeded into the lower education or primary education institutions and secondary education institutions and tertiary education institutions all are unable to get their degrees in order to teach without subscribing, more or less ascribing to these ideologies. And until you change education institutions or institutions of education, you can't change education institutions, because what are you going to be drawing upon except for people who have already subscribed or ascribed to this? And I'm using those words incorrectly, but either they passed the bar of accepting those beliefs by writing them out, or they actually believe in those beliefs. And those beliefs are particularly attuned to people who would end up being teachers and psychologists and those invested in the humanities. People who have high verbal traits, people who are highly motivated by empathy. That's what this ideology is created to pass through people who are empathetic in nature. So, yes, on the ground, restock school boards, be very targeted in your approach, know when to call a spade and when not to call a diamond a spade, when packaging everything under CRT might be good on the Fox News and the federal level, and on levels, maybe even state level, it's not going to be so good at actually engaging with this and then recreating a pedagogy that serves the needs of all Americans, that includes all Americans, that includes all these different American stories. That's the weakness of the pre-CRT education system, is that it did not figure out a correct way to balance out all the diversity of stories within our nation. I think that there is more work to do on that. And if we don't want the 1619 storytellers to have their way, we need to include that narrative that they would like to speak to in a way that constellates that, perhaps within an American pluralism and within a more perfect union rather than an imperfect union that needs to be dismantled in order for a perfect union to suddenly sprout from the ashes. We need a understanding of the perfectibility of our institutions that balances the perfect ideal with the imperfect past, and engages in a process of revision that we already know about. Every time you boot up your computer, every 2 weeks, every time you open up an application, every 2 weeks on your phone, it says, hold on, we're updating. We already know that things aren't perfect, that things are improved or disimproved or disproved, improved or disimproved by these continual updates. But we're living in a world of continual updates. So we should be able to counter the critical race theory with a understanding or a inclusion of all these different identities, all these different narratives. There's no way we can't not do that. There's no way we can't not do that. There's no way that we can't not do that. There's no way that we can avoid doing that. How to do that is the open question. Under what pedagogy, under what ideology is the question. And because CRT, critical theory, is exploiting a weakness in the system that needs to be combated with a better system, not with just an all-out war, not with just a total war, a total denunciation, and a rigidity of the system to revert back to a golden era that never existed in the first place. So there's a lot of work to do, and it's a lot of work to do. So don't get stressed out about it, because this is just Benjamin Boyce. Colin Wright wants me to drink, so I'm going to drink. Okay, computational propaganda. You will see how both right and left push their narratives into mainstream, even if untrue. Well, yeah, it's all game theory, so I guess computational propaganda is another way of investigating how that actually is effective. I mean, because the game isn't, ultimately there is a game going on, and you have to admit that you have to compromise on nuance. You have to compromise on compromising in order to right things, right? You have to compromise the meta in order to play the game. And so there's just different games going on. One game is to comment on games and to be triggered by games and then to hash out why you're triggered. And then you have to be constantly triggered because people want you to hash out how you're triggered, which is another game. Super chat $5 from Jenny's Getting Inky with it. Welcome back, Jenny. Do you think if he didn't play it in that way that people would be as aware of what's going on with CRT? See, and the thing is with attention, like you have to play to the surface. You have to dumb things down. You have to iconicize things. You have to work on a very chunky ideological narrative level in order to cast your narrative and recast the broader narrative according to your terms. You have to play at that level. You have to dumb yourself down to AOC levels in order to be as prominent, or perhaps I should say protuberant, as AOC is in discourse above her actual intellectual weight. You have to dumb things down. You have to be a dick or a tit in order to get the most bang for your buck. Yes, that was a good one. And so you have to be vulgar cartoons on a wall. You have to do it. You have to play vulgarly. But if you're not doing the work of tying that vulgarity into nuance, like that's the thing. You have to be able to shift and then shift back. You have to be able to shift and shift back. And so you need some sort of think tank where you need some sort of constellation of people who are good at the bull in the china shop, who are good assassins, right? You need to assemble some sort of like multi-tiered team of people with different skill sets. Chris Rufo has a certain skill set and is playing well to the game that he's playing, but there's more game than he's playing. And how far can he play that game without being countered on that same level by another argument from the other side that's just as shallow, right? You need to tie that Chris Rufo game, and I'm sorry to use Chris Rufo as a stand-in or an icon for a certain game, but he's doing really well, so I think he deserves that. He's getting good results, but you have to tie that. Once he gets his hook in, he has to pass the ball over to the other level game. Because they're batting fourth on this one level, right? CRT is in schools. CRT doesn't exist, blah, 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 blah. And like Fox News, CNN going back and forth. But it has to be tied back into actual structural change and actual implementation of things that are beneficial for humanity and being against, or for our society. And just being against bad ideas is not good for our society. Right? Just being on the warpath in and of itself doesn't help our culture, doesn't create more culture. So eventually the game has to be passed off from the culture war into the cultural creation, into some sort of cultural institution, cultural creation. Get into art, get into science, get into engineering, get into infrastructure, right? And then get into actually getting somebody into the Oval Office, even though that's all bullshit anyways. That's not a doofus of one way or another. So, what's my favorite type of couch? It's not a divan. Divan? I have a couch right now that's a very wonderful couch. And I don't know what type of couch it is, but it is a couch, and it's got very broad seats, and it's beige, and it's a really good couch. It's the best couch I've ever owned. I spent some money on it. It's the first couch, I bought a futon before that, but futons isn't a couch. It's a futon. It's the first couch that I actually bought. It was a good purchase. It was like $800, but I got it on discount. So it was probably like a $1,200 couch. And it's really puffy. It's held up well. We've had it for a couple of years now. I don't think that answers your question. Colin's got a brother and he's doing some family time. That's good. I think I filled up my hour. We're almost at an hour, so we can just relax. RP. Thanks, Ben. I feel myself going crazy in the world. Hearing your viewpoint makes me feel like at least I'm not alone generally in the world. Thank you. You know what? You know what made me feel alone? They came out with a 50th year or 50-year anniversary edition of Uno, and I bought it because I liked that game, and it came in the mail, and I got it, and I opened the package, and I felt alone. Like, what do I do with this collector's edition of Uno? I am so alone in life. So alone. So I feel alone with you. That's why I live stream, to be together alone. Together alone. I wonder how many people is there anybody? I'm sorry to be to talk directly to chat. No, that's all I've been doing. Is there anybody in chat that's listening to this with one other person, or are we all alone right now? Is there one person that isn't alone right now, or are we all alone right now? Are we just together alone? Eric Hyland asked about this guy named Vosh. I haven't watched him at all. He's highly verbally intelligent. I can tell you that. But I've seen people get hooked on him, and then they start spouting things that I don't trust. So I don't know if he's a good influence or not. But I don't know. I know that he had Paul Vanderklay on. So if I would watch anything from Vosh, it would be the Paul Vanderklay conversation. Look at that. Okay. Wait. GDBD Swab is not alone, I think. Solo. Loner gang. Yeah, look at that. Oh, okay. Casey's got a wife. Algernon's got a cat. Look at that. I'm alone together. Vausch means vacuum in German. Ploppy boys bro left the room. Oh no. Cyanide 2020 said, Benjamin A. Boyce, are you aware yet that at the recent convention of U.S. mayors, they adopted Resolution 68, which gives explicit approval for implementing CRT in K-12 schools across the country? Well, there goes that talking point. What? They just lie. I mean, it's so asymmetrical. I don't know how to solve the world's problems, but I know that the losers can't win. So we need a winning strategy. So the losers don't win. Oh, this is beautiful. Jacqueline writes, Uno is the loneliest number. I'm wrapping up. I'm feeling relieved. I didn't want to talk because I had one beer in me, and I didn't want to make a fool of myself on the live stream, but that felt good. And I hope I didn't spoil the episode that I'm doing on Evergreen, but I'll have all the primary sources in there. So I guess it's a prelude to that. It's really interesting, though. I think that there's a way to counter critical theory by using it as a like what the British call a torch, or what the Americans call a flashlight, like a very harsh LED light, like the ones that are gazing upon me right now, that are actually a little bit tungstened, perhaps too tungstened. There's a way of using critical theory to highlight blind spots within so-called liberalism or pluralism or whatever it is. There's a problem or a switch where it goes into prevaricating on creation, prevaricating on construction, because the project of deconstruction brings to light that nothing's perfect. That's the problem. Once you start to engage with that full-time, criticism full-time, you see that everything can be infinitely deconstructed. And so you start to end up making emotional arguments because your brain cannot be trusted to just simply leave something alone, right? So hyper-intelligent people succumbing to critical theory or to acid criticism of everything, all and sunder, is their devolution into emotional arguments. The devolution, just for example, it's an imperfect example, and I'm sorry, atheists, to bring this one up. The devolution of new atheism into social justice was because you had people who were so smart and so good at tearing things down that they couldn't say anything that they couldn't then tear down. And so then they turned to emotional proclamations that could not be torn down, that could then justify the tearing down of anybody who questioned those emotional proclamations. Because in those emotional proclamations, those people felt good about themselves. Those people felt at peace and that they had a moral certainty in their being, because everything outside of them that they concentrated their energies on was tearing down injustice, was tearing down this oppressive system of Christianity or theism or whatever it was. And that's a particular susceptibility within hyper-intelligent people that succumb to the critical project, is that they don't have anything in the end except for emotions that then escape beyond their grasp of correcting, because they can't trust their critical capacity to correctly correct themselves and their emotional proclamations, because their critical capacity is too honed in on criticizing. And so that's the thing. Again, I go back to tithing yourselves to creative endeavors, tithing ourselves to peace and worship and creativity, like just making a little space in one's life to not be a raging asshole on the internet, clean up a street, create something beautiful, so that you have a safe space from which you can, a stable space, a fruitful or fecund space from which to actually seed something after the ruination comes up. And that's the thing. That's the thing about critical theory, critical race theory, or dumbing down everything into critical theory and critical race theory and woke and anti-woke. The entire project, the entire thing is a culture war. It's not a culture something. Create culture, not war. Hippy dippy, I know, but it's the end of the live stream, so I'm allowed to do that. I should probably be drinking more. I hope I look good. Not for my own sake, but just for the camera's sake. It looks like it looks like I'm getting close to not needing to futz with my cameras anymore. I could have a light source, a really dim light source right there to just create like just the tiniest bit of definition on my hair and here. I think I'm close to getting this setup set. Who knows? All by myself. I finished Last of Us 2, and I really enjoyed it. They did really good. So I'm playing Last of Us 1, which I quit because I just don't like zombie games, but it turns out to be more than just a zombie game. Last of Us 2 got a lot of baloney, got a lot of negative reviews on it, and I understand the negative reviews. There could be a construal of it being ideological, and it is certainly ideological insofar as what myself and Jonathan Peugeot were talking about everything having to be about the successor ideology, the successor narrative to the masculine hero, which is the feminine hero or the female hero. And The Last of Us 2 takes up the mantle of the willful feminine that is on a revenge quest. And so from certain levels of analysis, it's a trope that has problems with it that could be investigated further or complicated further. But because it operates within the blind spot of being a strong female character or a strong alternative identity character, it doesn't have to actually deal with certain variations within its theme. All that aside, I found it quite impactful, very beautiful game, very, very narrative based, and I really enjoyed it. So that's the game that I played over the last few weeks, and I appreciate what they did. I appreciate it. all told. So I'm playing the first game, which I haven't played yet. So we'll see how that happens, which ironically enough has a male hero saving a young female from imminent assault of zombies and bad guys of various makes. So that's what I have to say about that. So I'll play that first one, and that's that. I have some really good interviews coming up. One with Nancy Rommelman, but I'm waiting for her to drop her website so that people can find the website. Nancy Rommelman is a journalist of a decidedly centrist take who was stationed or who lived in Portland for a while and then moved to New York and then ended up reporting on Portland quite a bit. We had a really good conversation about journalism and storytelling. It's a really good conversation. I've been sitting on that. I also spoke with a comic, Glenn Rockowitz, who has a interview or a speech or a some sort of performance called "The Moth" by Glenn, 2 N's, Rockowitz on YouTube. I watched it because he followed me on Twitter for some reason, and it totally hit me in the feels. I was just bawling by the end of it, and so I had him on, and we spoke earlier today, and I found it was an easy one. It's going to be Honesty is the best comedy, because he's a comedian who's had cancer 3 times now, like terminal cancer, three times since 1999, or for 26 years or something like that. He's been dealing with terminal cancer. So he's a really good guy, and I actually want to have him on to live stream quite a bit. So that's what's going on in the queue. I have a few other interviews in the queue and this Evergreen thing going on. I also am speaking with Rob Dreyer tomorrow. Let me look at his name. Rob Dreyer, who is the author of Live Not by Lies, which is about how Christians within communists survived communism. And I really enjoyed that book, and I'm really glad they accepted my invitation. I'm trying to get Neil Stephenson on my channel. I figured out a way to get these big names on my channel. I'm trying to get Neil freaking Stephenson on my channel. I'm working on that. He's got a new book coming out in a couple weeks here. I really want him on. I really want him on. I don't think that he would like me too much. I don't know why, because I'm just so intimidated by him, but I'm trying to get him on, and I know he doesn't do interviews, but I might just charm the pants onto him or off him, whatever he wants, however he wears his pants. Neil Stephenson, I'm trying to get him on. He lives in Seattle. I don't know if that makes a difference. I live in Olympia. That makes all the difference in the world. So that's what I'm trying to get on. Anyhow, so I'm going to wrap up with this super chat and let you guys float away in peace. I really appreciate this channel and all the audience, and thank you for allowing me to learn on my feet about what I'm doing, what I'm trying to do with this content creation. Super chat $9.99 by Tommy Riley. One last thing, do some homework on Gustav Le Bon's. God damn it, motherfucker pays me. Fucking now I have to do this fucking. Sorry for the cussing. I don't like homework. Okay, Gustav Le Bon's. Oh shoot, where did you go? And of course, Gustav Le Bon's Political Revolutions. Le Bon's Political Revolutions. French Revolution. Founders of Mass Psychology. Okay. Oh, Neil Stephenson. Really keen on him. Diamond Age is my favorite book of his. I think it's fair to say Diamond Age, then Cryptonomicon, then Anathema. I think that's the order I would do, but I think I read Anathema more than I read Cryptonomicon. But Diamond Age is just so imaginative. It's such a good book. Snow Crash is really good too, but Diamond Age is phenomenal work of imagination. I just read Seven Eves, which is really good. It's highly technical. It's really good. There's some problems that I had with it There are some problems that I had with it, but just as a work of speculative fiction, amazing. I haven't been able to get through Rimdi because it's about World of Warcraft, and I already wrote a book about World of Warcraft, and he was just rehashing my ideas. And there's other books of his that I haven't read, Fall or Dodge in Hell, and Rimdi. I haven't read, but I highly recommend Snow Crash. Neil Stevenson, if you haven't read that. Cryptonomicon's great too. An Anathema is really good. He's getting drier and drier. Seven Eves is really good. It's super dry, but this guy can talk about like freaking physics. He can turn parabolas and like the speeds of bullets. Like he just goes on for pages and pages about how bullets go in a certain arc with regards to gravity or like different bodies. And you're like, okay, this is just a science lesson, but somehow he just makes it so readable or listenable, if that's your thing. He's a phenomenal writer. Phenomenal writer. He's a legend. I didn't read his Baroque cycle. That was too much for me. There was too much name dropping in it for me. I might give that audiobook turn. I mean, that's 90 hours of content that I might do, but that's enough for me. I hope you guys have a good evening. I'm still adapting to this time change. I don't like that it's 8 o'clock. It feels like 10 o'clock to me, but I'm adjusting. It's so dark, so early, but here we go into this darkest time of the year. My Bo Jiden interview is coming up. Look forward to that once I get my implants all fixed up. That will be alive. And seriously, Diamond Age is so freaking entertaining. So entertaining. It's earlier in his career. I'll have to read that again. Anyhow, so I'm going to go cook some food. I don't know what I'm going to cook. Probably just macaroni and chili leftovers because that is how I roll right now. Good night.